All right, hello and welcome to this recording. We're going to be looking at connecting VBA to a database to populate data from a database into our Visual Basic application, which we can then use on the spreadsheet. We can use it on a user form. We can do a number of things with this. So a little tangent here. Let's talk just briefly about Microsoft Access, which is part of the Microsoft Office. And we will use this for our example. This is Access is a common personal and small business database. For larger organizations, you would use something like Oracle, or you'd use something like Microsoft SQL or SQL, something on a bigger scale. But for a personal or small group, Access is great. So if you pull up Access, it looks like this. And your homework is to replicate what we're doing in this video. You're going to create a database, put data into the database that you create, and then you're going to use VBA code to transfer that data from the database into Access. So you can see how that works programmatically. It's kind of cool. So to start a blank database, once you launch Excel, click on Start New Database, and you get this window. I'm going to call this Survey because it's going to have survey questions. And then the standard extension is ACC for Access DB, ACC DB. And you can browse where you want it to go. I'm going to have mine save on we'll browse to the C drive, into the BDAN folder, and this is where I'm going to save it at. Okay. So the BDAN 410 folder didn't exist. I created this folder. It's not a default folder on the C or root drive of your machine. So you can save it wherever you want to. You just need to know where it's saved because your VBA code is going to reference it later. So if you're following along, you can create a folder BDAN 410 on the C drive, and then the code in the handout will work as written. So specify where it's going to be, say create, and then Access creates the database at whatever path you gave it with whatever name you gave it. And this is what an Access table looks like. So there's a generic table 1. We'll change the name of that at some point. There's a generic field ID. We'll assign this to be the primary field. Every table in a database. Some of this is, most of this, if not all of this, should be some review for you and familiarity with working with Access in another class or some prior existence. But I'll still repeat these things and hopefully it'll sound familiar to you. As we want to add fields here, there's no second field other than the default field, and there's some properties here. I can't change the name of the field until I add some data to it. So what this survey is going to be for us is going to be a series of questions. So who was the first president of the United States? Okay. So that's a survey question. And once I have data in that first survey question, then if I want to, I can click on the column header and I can change the name, right click, and I can modify the name and say question, right? And I can do this for all of these, however many properties I want to put into my database. Now, so going back to the PDF document, it's telling us that you want to create a table, and you want the table is going to be renamed questions with a S on the end of it. That's not required in Access. This is just my personal database style. Is I always have my tables be the object or subject plural because it contains multiple records or instances of that. So each one of these is a question, and the table is questions. But you can call it whatever you want to. Access doesn't care. It's kind of like a variable name, whatever you want to make it. And whatever the name of the object is, like that's plural for the table name, a singular version of that, question, with an ID after it, is how I do my primary keys. And Access doesn't care. You can call it whatever you want to, but it's just the style that I've gotten used to, and it turns out to be helpful to do that. This table, according to the PDF, the questions table is going to have the following fields. Question ID, which would be the primary field. The ID at the end kind of tells us that. Again, Access doesn't care, but it's just good style. Question text answer A, answer B, answer C, answer D, and correct. Right? So if we look at the design view instead of the data sheet view, it might look like this. The ID, the primary key, we'll just use the default auto number. There's reasons for using auto number as the primary key. There are other options. Your primary key can be a string. Your primary key can be a combination of two different fields together. But for efficiency purposes, it turns out that just using the auto ID as an integer type number without decimal places, without characters, ends up being the most efficient. It's also good recommendation to use the primary key not as actually a field in the database unless you really need to. There's times where you could use the person's social security number as their primary key, and the social security number is also actual data in the records. But again, as a general rule of thumb, this is my opinion when it comes to database design. Everybody has their opinions, and you can argue and fight over it. What I have found has worked well is to just use a non-data field for the primary key and auto number it. I think you can, if you want to see some arguments for that, you can do a Google search and read about those. So I can put these fields in here. I can either way. I can do them, type in the question and the answers and do the properties, or I can switch over to a design view and fill in the fields and the data types this way. When you switch views, you have to save the table if you haven't saved it. And I have not saved this yet, so I'm going to save this. Again, my style, questions, because each record is a question and the table has many questions, plural. And now we're looking at the same table in just a different view. And this first field was question ID according to the handout. Question text, answer A, oops, answer B, answer C, answer D, and correct, which was also short text. And just going back to the PDF. Right, so that's kind of summarized here in the PDF for us. So this is very simple. You can get much more complicated with your data types. Just like with our program variables, the variables themselves can have data types. We're just sticking with integer, double, and string, pretty much taking care of all the data types we need. But for special purposes, there are reasons you want to do different data types. For our purpose, just to build this database and then get data in the database and then use program code, so programmatically transfer the data from the database to the VBA, this simple setup is going to work for us. Okay, so now that I have, and as you're familiar probably in doing database, if you want to change some of the properties on any of these fields, you can do this down here in the field properties. But again, we're doing just the minimum here. Let me go back to the datasheet view. Do I want to save this? Yes. And now I've got those field names that I'm expecting across the top. I've got who was the first president of the United States, and Bill Clinton, and Ross Perot. That's an ancient 80s reference. Nobody will know that, but what can I say? How about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln? The correct answer in this group is C, and then we go to the next question. Now, because it's an auto number, I don't have to type the value in there. It'll automatically give this the number 2 once I type the second question text. And for this survey, I think the handout shows some sciencey questions. For your homework, I want you to create questions on whatever you want to. What is the name of the real life person that Bernard Android is based on in Westworld. Okay. I can't see all that text easily there, but if I resize this, I think I'll be able to read that. So if you're a Westworld fan, the real life person that Bernard's Android is based on. We have 4 answers for there. The correct answer is Arnold. Okay. And some other answers might be Ashton, Alexander, and applesauce. Okay. The correct letter there is A for our choices, and do this for all 5 of our questions. Question 3, yes, no, maybe, never, and the answer to that was no. Right. So I'm just going to put 3 questions in here. I want you to go ahead and put 5 questions in. Oh, and part of what you're doing with this database is next unit, we're going to go back to using the user form, and we're going to populate the user form survey using the questions you're writing in your database here. So, but we're stepping away from user forms. We're not doing anything with user forms today, but we will revisit them next unit, and we'll pull the data for our survey quiz from the database that you're creating. So these questions are going to be reused next week as the survey that you're going to be building. But for today, we're just creating the survey. Okay, so I've got that saved, and I have it saved in C:(bdan 410. You'll take a few more minutes in there, you'll build a nice survey. Page 2. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to VBA, and we're going to connect to that database using an object called ADODB. And that object contains some, that class contains some objects that we can use, including a connection and a record set that will allow us to communicate back and forth. So you can follow along in the reading here, pull up the Visual Basic Editor, make sure that Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects 6.0 is selected. The most recent now, if it 6.1 was the most recent, I believe at the time of recording this lecture. If it's newer, if you see something that's 6.2 or 6.3, or you see something that's 7, get the most recent version of Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects and make sure that that's visible in VBA. Okay, so what that means is, let's pull up Excel. Inside of Excel, let's go under the Developer tab, into the Visual Basic Editor, and here inside the Visual Basic Editor, get that on the video recording size. Let's go under the Tools option and References, and I'll see that we have 4 things checked, and the Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects is not one of those things that are checked. Okay. So these are the unchecked ones are listed alphabetically. So we go down to the M's for the alphabetical. Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects. So there's a list of them here. Here's the most recent one, 6.1. Okay. So I'm checking the most recent, and I say OK. Now when I go under Tools, References, there's 5 checks, and the Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects 6.1 is available. That's good, because what that tells us is that we can now write some code and make use of those ActiveX ADODB controls. So we pull up a new module. We're not using a user form this unit. We will next unit. We're just going to the old module like we did on our very first VBA code we ever wrote. And we're going to write this code. So you can follow along on the PDF, and I'll just type it here and explain as I'm typing it. So sub demo code, okay. And then we come down and we declare a connection. The name of this is anything you want it to be. I'm using mycon as an abbreviation. Its type is an ADODB. Now notice that the code complete is telling us ADODB. You will only see that ADODB in code complete if you have the class that we added. And when I say ADODB dot, it knows that we're talking about a list of controls associated with database connections. ActiveX Data Objects is the name of it, database connections. and one of those things, a database objects, and one of those is a connection, and there it is. Now I'm going to change my font here. That doesn't look very good. Options, font. Instead of using narrow, let me just use Arial regular instead of the Arial narrow. That'll help. That'll look better. Okay. And then I'm going to say, so that's creating the connection as a control. I'm actually going to use the set command. So what's the difference between the dim and the set? Dim declares the type, so it knows is it an integer, is it a double, whatever. But because this is a non-standard type, we have to actually explicitly set it. We don't have to use the set command for integers or strings or doubles. But when you add a new class of types of objects that don't exist in the standard build, then you're probably going to have to use the new command, or the new command to actually create it, as opposed to just naming it. So we have to do two statements to basically declare the variable instead of just normally one. I call this thing mycon. The connection string property is, and this is something that you need to just type it. If you don't know it in the PDF, there's a link on this page to a website. Let me go ahead and click on this. I haven't looked at it in a while. Hopefully it's going to pull up. The connection string references, so whatever database you're using. So we're using, you can see there's lots of databases here. We're using Microsoft Access, which I don't see up here. Why do I not see? Oh, it's on Access. I was looking under Microsoft. So I click on Access, and it would give us the command string that's expected, right? So I can actually copy this from here if I don't want to type it myself. I think that would probably work. There is a semicolon at the end, and there's a semicolon here. So there's two properties, a provider property that ends with a semicolon and a data source property. I'm just going to see what happens if I try to copy this. I'm not actually sure. Go back to my access code, and let me see if I can paste that. And then close the quotes. Okay. So what does that look like? Provider equals, so it looks pretty good. It looks like I was able to copy paste that. But it's this weird text of Microsoft.ace.oledb.12.0 semicolon. That's the provider, which means it's a version of Access. And then data space source equals, without any quotes, C:, the path, wherever it's in. Now, it's not my folder on my machine, right? Because I did mine in, if you remember, bdan410. And the name of my database is not my access file, but survey.aacdb, ACC access DB. Okay. So there's that line. And I'll just tell you in advance that for some reason, it sometimes gripes at this line, and you almost have to, if that happens, you might want to copy the path from the actual, pull up a file browser and get the path from here. It should be the same, right? It's C:/bdan410 or whatever your name is. If I copy that from there and then paste it in here for the path part, I think that'll help it work. I'm going to not do that this time to see if it crashes. I almost hope it does crash, and then I can try that fix and see if it works, because it'll crash for you too, and I'd like you to not be thrown off by that, but get through it. So create the connection string and then open the connection string. It will not crash on this line. If it crashes, it'll crash on the open command. If there's an error in this string, it's the open command that'll halt when we run, because it'll try to use that connection string to open. And if we can open it, we also want to close it when we're done. Code complete, make sure that pulls up, close, okay, and great. So that's the code we have there in that first part. Let's try to run this. Let's do step into, which is F8. So this will work one line at a time by pressing the F8 key. I'll step through this code one line at a time. So set, so this is actually creating the object. There shouldn't be any problem with the set command. There shouldn't be any problem with this command, but when I try to open it, if the database is locked because it's already open and being edited, if the database is in the wrong folder, if there's a error in my connection string, if there's anything wrong, it'll crash on the open. In this case, it didn't. Okay, so I was able to open it. I'm programmatically accessing a completely different file, Microsoft Access. I'm not doing anything with it. We'll do that in just a second. And now I'm going to close it. Okay, so we ran through it just fine. But if there had been a typo here, right, if that had said data source without a space in it, for example, and I tried to run this, right, it doesn't complain at the line of the connection string, but when I try to use the connection string to open, womp, 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 it crashes. Okay, so if you get an error on the open command, there's nothing wrong with the open command. The problem is your connection string is not right. You have the wrong name of the database, you have the wrong extension for the database, you have the wrong path for the database, right? You don't have a space there, so one of those guys. And what's cool about this is if you were using something else, if you were using, Lightbase or MySQL, right? MySQL is pretty common. You might very well use MySQL. I can go to this same connection string site. I can say, okay, well, there's the connection string I want to use for MySQL, right? So if I want to connect to a SQL Server, right? A SQL Server Compact, SQL Server. If I'm using Oracle, right, a big, powerful industrial database, Oracle, well, there's the connection string for an Oracle database, right? Now, Oracle databases are a little more complex, but the point is we can connect to any of these. So now that we have a connection, what we want to do is we want to use the next thing called the record set to actually hold the data in the transfer from the database to the to our VBA code. So let's modify the code as it was shown there in the PDF. So what we're going to do is directly below the declaration of the connection, we're going to also declare a record set. And again, my abbreviation is going to be myRS, and this is an ADODB.recordSet, not record, but record set. Okay. And because these are non-standard objects, these are objects that we added through a class that we had to add through the settings. Declaring them isn't enough. You have to say new to create it. So I'm going to set the record set to be equal to a new ADODB record set. The sequence is you create the connection first, and then after you have a successful connection and you've opened the connection, you can create the record set. So I'm going to use the active connection. I'm going to specify the active connection to be the connection I just created. Okay, so I have this connection. I'm now using the connection, associating the connection with the record set, and also going to specify the source of the record set. Now this is interesting. If you know SQL commands like select star from employees, inner join with receivables, right? Or whatever. If you know SQL, this is where you could give a SQL command. We're not doing a complicated SQL command. We're just doing questions. Right? Just the name of the table. This would be the same thing as basically saying select star from questions. If I wanted to be a little more SQL-y, I could say that and it would probably work as well. But I'm just going to give the name of it. And it's going to be the same thing as doing a select star. I'm going to get all the data from this table. So the record set is going to hold the data transfer between the database and our VBA program. I have to have a connection to create the record set, and then I have to have a SQL or some kind of a command to tell me what data to get. So we've done those two things. Now we can just say myrs open, right? So once again, the open command may not work, but if it doesn't work, the problem's not the open. The problem is either I have a bad connection, or I have a query or a request to that database that isn't possible to be met. Okay. So if that works, then we've got a connection. We're in really good shape. Let me go ahead at this point and just wrap up. I'm not going to do anything with the record set yet, but if you open, you want to close it, and we close the record set before we close the connection. Let's just, again, without doing anything with the data, let's just see if this is going to run by pressing F8 to step through. So create a new connection, create a new record set. There's a connection string. Does it open? It does. Okay. Record set needs to have a valid connection. The record set needs to have a valid SQL statement or table request. Does this open? I press space. It does. Okay, so this is really good. This is really, really good. We're connecting to the database, and we're able to populate, open up a record set. Now, I can't see it right now. I don't even think the code complete is going to necessarily give me anything here. I might be able to, under the debug window, there might be some way to use, I don't know if I can do this. Let me just try and do this. So looking at we haven't done much with the debug window. But what it allows you to do is look at one of your objects. So the myrs, I can see properties and values. I can see what I'm requesting there, what I'm really looking for, the data source. Question ID. Okay. I'm not seeing a quick version up. Don't worry about that. If it was going to pop up really quick, I was going to be happy, but it didn't. If I want to play around with it more, but it's getting beyond what I wanted to see. Pressing F8, close the record set, close the connection, and we're done. So at this point, after we open the record set, we have our hands on the data, right? So to show you this, let me say this. I'm just going to message box it out. Okay. And I'll just message box the record set. And the way we reference it is a bang exclamation point. I call it bang. An exclamation point, and then the field that we want to look at. So this is one way of getting our hands on this data. The record set is like the database table itself. It has multiple records, but we're only having one active record at a time. So whatever the active record at the time, the first record in the record set, or the results of the query, the first record in the result of the query is going to be the current record set. So I'm taking that record set, exclamation point, the name of the field. And again, you have to type it exactly correct. It's not smart. Programs, computers are not smart or stupid. They do what you say, not what you meant to tell them. So in my database, the name of that field has to be exactly what I call it in my code. But if that works, it'll give me that value. One more time. And if that works, then I'm pulling from the database. See, Access isn't even open. I've closed Access. I do not have Access open at all, but I just pulled that question from the code. Very cool. How do I get to the next field? MyRS has a command, move next. Okay. And there was move previous and some others. And now if I say the same command, msg box, message box, my record set, exclamation point, question text, it will give me the second question. So I'm going to run this, and I'll just run it this time. The stepping, I don't need to, it works. Who was the first president of the United States? What is the name of the real-life person that Bernard's android is based on in Westworld? That grammar may not be great. So we have programmatic access in our code. We can use program code to access. I hate to reuse the word access twice. We can use code to get our hands on data from a database. In this case, from an Access database. So that's called programmatic. We're programmatically getting our hands on the data. Getting back to your PDF, the code in your PDF, what I just showed you about the question text and the move next, that's not in your PDF. What's in your PDF is this code that says worksheets.add, and which will create a new worksheet on our spreadsheet. And then starting in cell A1, I want to copy from record set my record set. So I'm going to use, because I can have more than one record set, more than one connection string. So using the one and only one we have this time, I'm going to take whatever's in that record set, not just the first record, but the whole record set, and copy it, the whole record set, into the current spreadsheet starting at cell A1, and it'll copy across and down as necessary. So let's run this code, and when we run this code, let me pull up Access in the same time so that as we run it, we can actually see the spreadsheet change as we're running it here. So here we go. Let's run this. I'm going to do the F8 because I like just stepping through this and talking about it. This is simple. There's not much code here, but if it messes up, you'll it's frustrating. So we do the connection string. We've already talked about that. And then we open it. Good. So once again, we have access to the database. Now we're going to use the record set. Do we have a valid SQL command or a table reference? Is that table name spelled correctly? Is everything good? If it is, the open command will work. Boom, the open command worked. I'm about to do the worksheets.add. If you look over here at the Excel file, you'll see that it only has one sheet, worksheets.add. When I press F8 and do that command, it adds a new spreadsheet. Right, so I've got a new worksheet in my spreadsheet file. And now I'm about to copy the entire record set into this new active sheet, and boom, there it is. Right, I have 3 records. Yours is going to have 5 records because you're creating a database with 5 questions and the answers for those 5 questions and the correct answer for those 5 questions. That worked well, and that's all we're doing. It doesn't always work well because of a variety of mistakes, a variety of problems. A typo in here, right? If that's AEE, it's going to crash. If you don't have a semicolon, it's going to crash. If you don't have a space, it's going to crash. If you have a space in, if the name of the path is off by a character, it's going to crash. If the name of the thing doesn't work, it's going to crash. So there's a number of ways that this won't work, and here's what it looks like when it doesn't work. Right? So I do the open command, and it complains. If I say debug, it'll highlight the step that it crashed on, open command. The problem's not the open command. The problem is the connection string leading to it. And I'm like, oh, where's, so I can just try to double check my spelling. But if it's still not working, I recommend you use the browser area here to go back and get the path from there, copy the path from there, and then under data source equals, paste that in, copy, paste that in that way. And you could even get the do the same thing for if you're not exactly sure. It's silly, I know, but if you're not exactly sure that you got the name of the database correct, copy it from the File Explorer, paste it in, and then you should have pretty good confidence that when you restart, the program's going to work. Okay, and it did. So it created a third sheet. And again, it copied all the data from that sheet. So I did it once here on sheet 2, once on sheet 3, and every time I run it, it will it'll add a new worksheet and copy the data from the record set to that. Okay, so I hope you understand how really amazing cool this is, that we opened up a database and copied data from the database into Excel without ever touching the database with our hands. It was all done programmatically. VBA code opened the database. VBA code got the data, queried the database, pulled that data into Excel, and once you have your hands on the data, you can do whatever you want to do with it, right? So next unit, we'll use that data, go back to our user form, and make a really cool survey app. But for this unit, I just want you to make that database connection. Okay, confirm that I said everything I want to say here on our homework exercises, and I think so. Be sure to save both the Excel file that has your code and also save the database. So create the database and save it. Create VBA file. I could reword that to say create a VBA file that has code for accessing the database. And then save, there it says write VBA code. So upload both files, the access file and the Excel file, to Blackboard, and be sure to keep your database because we're going to use it next unit. All right, wonderful. Have a good day.